The name Boeing comes from its founder, William E. Boeing. Born in 1881 in Detroit, Michigan, William came from a family of modest means, with his father working as a merchant. At that time, the Wright brothers were still 22 years away from their groundbreaking invention of the first successful airplane, which was little more than a collection of wooden parts tied together. Interestingly, the Boeing family's origins were also rooted in wood. William's father, Wilhelm Boeing, according to William's own account, hailed from a wealthy and old family in Hohenzieburg, south of Dortmund, Germany, and had served in the German military for a year. However, this claim might have been an embellishment by William after achieving success. At the age of 20, Wilhelm made the bold decision to leave his family and emigrate to the United States. At the time, such a move was seen as a desperate gamble for a better future in German society. Arriving in America in 1868, Wilhelm started at the bottom, working as a farm laborer, and began chasing the American dream. It was a challenging period, as the Civil War had ended just 3 years earlier, leaving the country in ruins and in need of rebuilding. Fortunately, Wilhelm arrived at the dawn of what would become the most rapid period of economic growth in American history, a 40-year boom that Mark Twain famously chronicled in his novel, The Gilded Age. The Gilded Age was a time when the American dream burned brightest, and many industrial titans who would shape the world emerged. Wilhelm, intelligent and adventurous, caught the attention of Karl Ortmann, a lumber magnate. Through Ortmann's favor, Wilhelm married into the family, becoming his son-in-law and securing a path to prosperity. Wilhelm purchased a plot of timberland in the Mesabi Range, which serendipitously turned out to have mining rights. This region in Minnesota became famous in 1887 for hosting the world's largest open-pit hematite mine, later known as the Iron Range, which ignited a steel boom across America. The Iron Range produced over half of the nation's iron ore, creating fortunes for many magnates, including companies like 3M, U.S. Steel, Cleveland-Cliffs, and even the Rockefeller family. To this day, remnants of abandoned iron mines in the Mesabi Range stand as silent witnesses to the rise of America's coal-steel complex. Unfortunately, Wilhelm's foresight was a bit ahead of its time. When he began logging the timberland, the iron deposits had yet to be developed, leaving him with little more than a wildly spinning compass needle. Tragically, Wilhelm passed away from influenza in 1890 at the young age of 42, leaving behind his wife, Mary, and their 3 children. William E. Boeing was just 8 years old at the time. It wasn't long after that young William discovered his family did, in fact, own a mine. Thanks to the mineral rights on the timberland, the Boeing family experienced a sudden windfall. Later, after his mother's passing, William inherited approximately $1 million, a staggering fortune at the turn of the 20th century. To put that in perspective, in Jules Verne's novel Around the World in 80 Days, the gentleman adventurer Phileas Fogg spent just $20,000, roughly $100,000, on extravagant purchases like an elephant and a steamship while rescuing a widow. After Mary remarried, William's relationship with his stepfather soured, and he was sent to Switzerland for schooling. Though William saw this as being exiled, the family provided him with enough money to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. According to William, his time in Europe taught him proper manners and decorum, which he claimed benefited him for the rest of his life. In other words, it helped him shed the nouveau riche image Americans of that era were often associated with. After a year in Switzerland, William returned to the United States, now with a polished European demeanor, and continued his education. Between 1899 and 1902, he attended the Sheffield Scientific School, originally part of Yale University but renamed after a generous donor. Sheffield contributed a large sum of money. At 22 years old, William Boeing decided to leave university without graduating and headed west to claim an inheritance land his father had purchased in Washington state. He began managing the family's timber business, and his ventures flourished. Over time, he acquired more land and expanded his operations, turning the timber business into a thriving enterprise. But as Boeing was building his timber empire, a groundbreaking technological innovation emerged. In 1903, the Wright brothers successfully conducted the first powered flight, and the event made headlines across the country, captivating the imagination of many, including the ambitious and spirited William Boeing. By 1908, Boeing had relocated to Seattle, which would later become the birthplace of his aviation company and remain one of its primary production hubs. The city is also home to the world-renowned Museum of Flight. In Seattle, Boeing purchased the Heath shipyard along the Duwamish River, which would later be transformed into Boeing's very first airplane manufacturing facility. In 1910, Boeing attended the Los Angeles International Air Meet, one of the earliest air shows in history and the first major aviation event in the United States. At 29, Boeing was already deeply fascinated by airplanes. Watching the planes soar through the sky during the show left him in awe. Inspired and eager to experience flight firsthand, he approached the pilots, hoping to arrange a ride on one of the boxy biplanes. However, the pilots, who carried themselves with the confidence of elite pioneers, dismissed him as just another wealthy thrill-seeker and refused his request. In hindsight, their refusal may have been a blessing in disguise. Early aviation was perilous, and crashes were alarmingly common. Yet, the danger did nothing to deter Boeing. His passion for flight only grew stronger. In 1915, thanks to an introduction from his friend Thomas Hamilton, Boeing met Conrad Westervelt, a naval engineer. This meeting between Boeing and Westervelt would lay the foundation for what eventually became the Boeing Company. Incidentally, Thomas Hamilton, the mutual friend, was also the founder of Hamilton Standard, a company that later developed the variable pitch propeller, a significant innovation in aviation technology. That same year, aviator Tura Moroni brought a Curtiss seaplane to Seattle. Boeing and Westervelt each took turns flying in the aircraft, soaring above Lake Washington. Recalling the experience in his memoir, Boeing wrote, at the time, "I sat beside Moroni, leaning against the lower edge of the wing, which was covered in a thin layer of fabric. As the biplane skimmed over the lake, the entire expanse of Lake Washington seemed to tilt and rush toward me, like a slanted canvas unfurling before my eyes." This was Boeing's first flight experience, and in many ways it was a transformative moment, one that he would never truly come down from. One can imagine his heart pounding, not only from the exhilaration of flying for the first time but also from the sheer precariousness of the Curtiss plane. It lacked even a basic cockpit, forcing both pilot and passenger to sit exposed on the wing. Despite the obvious risks that would terrify today's passengers, Boeing, ever the adventurer, embraced the experience wholeheartedly. This thrilling flight sparked an unshakable dream in Boeing. He began seriously contemplating the possibility of building airplanes. Through further conversations with Moroni, Boeing and Westervelt concluded that the Curtiss seaplane had significant room for improvement. "At the time, I was simply eager to learn how to fly," Boeing later wrote in his memoir. After gathering information from various sources, he applied to a flight school in Los Angeles founded by Glenn L. Martin in 1915. Martin's company would later evolve into Lockheed Martin, one of America's leading defense contractors. Boeing started his flight training in August of that year and, upon completing the course, purchased a Curtiss seaplane from the Martin factory for personal use. The aircraft, nicknamed Birdcage, earned its name because its wooden components were held together with tension wires, giving it the appearance of a birdcage. In October, the aircraft was delivered to William Boeing, but it malfunctioned during testing. Fortunately, Boeing himself was unharmed. When the Martin Company informed him that it would take several months to acquire the necessary replacement parts, Boeing felt deeply frustrated. However, he quickly shifted his perspective, thinking, "This plane is essentially just wooden planks tied together with wires, and I run a lumber business." This realization inspired Boeing to consider building his own aircraft during the waiting period. He shared his idea with his friend, naval engineer Conrad Westervelt, and the two decided to take action immediately. Westervelt reached out to Jerome Hunsaker, the founder of the first aviation program in the United States and the creator of the Aerodynamics Research Lab at MIT. Meanwhile, Boeing met with exhibition pilot Herb Munter, who was preparing for an aerial performance over Seattle Harbor. When Boeing asked Munter whether the public was interested in aviation, Munter replied sarcastically, "Most of them just come to watch crashes." Munter's cutting remark, though disparaging, fueled Boeing's determination. "I'm going to build a plane that won't crash," he vowed. Boeing and Westervelt then recruited a small team of technical assistants, totaling no more than 12 people, and began reverse engineering the water-based biplane Boeing had recently purchased. Their efforts culminated in the design of Boeing's first aircraft. At the time, the factory and hangar for the seaplanes were located on the shores of Seattle's Lake Union, within a shipyard, or more accurately, a makeshift workshop. In this modest setting, William Boeing personally piloted the maiden flight of the first Boeing airplane. The aircraft, a water-based biplane, was named the Bluebill or BW Model 1, with the initials representing Boeing B and Westervelt W. Measuring 25.5 feet in length, the plane achieved a flight distance of 900 feet during its test. Boeing piloted the Bluebill over Lake Union, making left and right turns, performing S-shaped maneuvers, and finally circling before gently landing on the water's surface. This historic moment took place on June 15, 1916, marking the birth of a company that would go on to shape the global aerospace industry. Inspired by the successful test flight, Boeing and Westervelt officially founded the Pacific Aero Products Company on July 15, 1916, focusing on manufacturing seaplanes. During this period, Westervelt's Chinese colleague from MIT, Wang Tzu, who held a master's degree in aeronautical engineering, joined the company. At the time, World War I was raging, and airplanes were beginning to play a reconnaissance role in battles overseas. Initially, pilots maintained a sense of gentlemanly decorum, exchanging waves when they encountered each other mid-air. But as millions of soldiers perished in the trenches, animosity between opposing sides intensified. Pilots started firing pistols at each other during aerial encounters, and soon, machine guns were mounted on planes, though aiming accurately remained a challenge. By 1917, the United States declared war on Germany, officially entering the global conflict. Conrad Westervelt left the company to join the military, prompting William Boeing to rename the business as Boeing Airplane Company. Wang Tzu became Boeing's first chief engineer and improved upon the BW Model 1 to develop the BW Model C. The demands of war accelerated the development of aircraft, and by 1918 the first bombers emerged, such as Britain's Handley Page 0400, equipped with 4 Lewis machine guns and capable of carrying 900 kilograms of bombs. These advancements captured the attention of the U.S. military and provided Boeing with an opportunity to expand. William Boeing quickly recognized that the U.S. Navy required seaplanes for training flight instructors. He transported 2 model seaplanes to Pensacola, Florida, where they were demonstrated to the Navy. The presentation was a success, earning Boeing a contract for 50 aircraft, an enormous order at the time that provided the company with its first substantial revenue, laying the foundation for future growth. On November 11, 1918, World War I came to an end. Europe lay in ruins, with 4 major empires dissolved. Meanwhile, the United States, far removed from the devastation, began to ascend as a global power. In the aftermath of the war, the aircraft market was flooded with cheap, second-hand military planes, leading to the industry's first major wave of overproduction. As new airplanes sat idle in warehouses and many aircraft manufacturers faced bankruptcy, Boeing had to pivot to survive. The company began producing items like dressing tables, countertops, and even a flat-bottomed boat called the Sea Sled. This shift was possible because Boeing's facilities were located in a shipyard, making the transition to boat manufacturing relatively straightforward. During this period, William Boeing wrote to his cousin, stating, "We should focus our efforts on developing aircraft for peacetime use. The most logical starting point would be commercial aviation." At the time, this vision was highly controversial. Many were still captivated by the technological advancements driven by wartime and the lucrative military contracts, believing the primary value of airplanes lay in their military applications. Air travel was seen as high risk, and while the public enjoyed aerial displays and stories of dogfights, few were brave enough to actually fly. However, Boeing had the foresight to recognize the untapped potential of civil aviation. He envisioned airplanes revolutionizing transportation, communication, and tourism. With this forward-thinking mindset, he positioned the company to capitalize on the shift from military to civilian applications in the aviation industry. Initially, the most practical civilian use for airplanes was postal delivery. In 1920, William Boeing personally piloted a C-700 aircraft, a civilian adaptation of a military model alongside pilot Eddie Hubbard, transporting 60 letters from Vancouver to Seattle. This marked the arrival of America's first international air mail and signaled Boeing's entry into the realm of civil aviation. By 1925, Boeing had developed the Model 40 mail plane specifically for postal routes. 2 years later, the improved Model 40A was introduced, featuring a more advanced air-cooled radial engine, a departure from the water-cooled engines still widely used at the time. The 40A also included a cabin with space for 2 passengers, laying the groundwork for commercial passenger aviation, though initially, passenger seating was only available when mail cargo space wasn't needed. Early passenger experiences were far from luxurious. Travelers often sat on mail sacks in open-air cockpits, braving intense winds head-on. This required not only physical resilience but also a strong mental constitution to endure such journeys. Despite these challenges, the Model 40A secured a significant contract with the U.S. Postal Service to deliver mail between San Francisco and Chicago. That same year, Boeing launched Boeing Air Transport, an airline dedicated to mail delivery. As public acceptance of air travel grew, passenger revenue began to surpass postal earnings. Boeing responded by developing the Model 80A, which, while still used for mail transport, now featured seating for 12 passengers, effectively becoming a passenger-focused aircraft. By 1929, as the Great Depression took hold, Boeing defied economic trends, earning $2.7 million and rapidly expanding. In just 13 years, the company had grown from a small operation with fewer than 20 employees into America's largest aircraft manufacturer. At this point, Boeing employed nearly 1,000 people and operated across diverse areas, including airline services, aircraft production, and a flight school in California that trained pilots and maintenance crews. By 1930, commercial aviation was thriving. That year, Boeing began developing its iconic Model 247, the first all-metal passenger airplane. This aircraft marked a significant departure from the wooden planes of earlier years, showcasing modern advancements like a streamlined design, retractable landing gear, and a low-wing configuration. It also featured cutting-edge technology such as an autopilot system and de-icing equipment on the wings and tail. The Model 247 could carry 10 passengers along with 181 kilograms of mail and offered a level of comfort previously unseen in aviation. With proper seating and even an onboard restroom, pilots no longer needed to rely on makeshift solutions like bottles or lunchboxes during flights. This era also saw the introduction of flight attendants, inspired by the calming presence of nurses in hospitals. Boeing believed these skilled young women could soothe nervous passengers and address the complaints of restless travelers. The Model 247 became a sensation, widely adopted by airlines and celebrated as a cornerstone of U.S. commercial aviation history. By 1934, Boeing was at the pinnacle of its business expansion and was officially known as United Aircraft Corporation. Through a series of strategic creations, mergers, and acquisitions, the company had grown into a giant in the aviation industry. It not only specialized in aircraft manufacturing but also extended its reach into related sectors such as aviation materials, engine production, airmail services, and passenger transportation. However, the deepening effects of the Great Depression sent shockwaves through the fledgling aviation industry. In February 1934, the U.S. government abruptly canceled all airmail contracts. Shortly after, the Air Mail Act of 1934, commonly referred to as the Black-McKellar Act, was introduced. The act imposed strict regulations that proved catastrophic for United Aircraft Corporation. Among its provisions, it mandated that aircraft and engine manufacturers could no longer have any affiliation with airlines. This led to the forced breakup of the company into three separate entities: Boeing Airplane Company, United Aircraft Corporation, and United Airlines. Feeling deeply disheartened and frustrated by the government's intervention, William Boeing resigned from all his positions within the company and sold his shares in protest. On June 20, 1934, William Boeing was awarded the prestigious Daniel Guggenheim Medal in recognition of his outstanding contributions and achievements in the field of aviation. After stepping away from the company, Boeing embarked on a life of retirement. He explored various investments and hobbies, including real estate, horse racing, boating, and fishing, while also dedicating himself to philanthropic endeavors. In 1956, the visionary founder of Boeing and a pioneer of the aviation industry, William Boeing, passed away. In his later years, he made only one appearance at a Boeing Company event when he was invited in 1954 to witness the rollout of the Boeing 707. This groundbreaking aircraft ushered humanity into the jet age, becoming the world's first commercially successful jetliner. Building on the success of the 707, Boeing went on to develop an iconic lineup of aircraft, including the 717, 727, 737, 747, 757, 767, 777, and 787 models, dominating the commercial aviation industry for nearly half a century. Even after William Boeing's departure, the company retained his name, Boeing, as its enduring identity. Over the years, the company experienced numerous ups and downs. It navigated World War II, acquired McDonnell Douglas, and competed fiercely with Airbus for dominance in the skies. Despite facing repeated crises, Boeing repeatedly demonstrated resilience through its technological expertise and operational excellence. At its peak during the 1960s and 1970s, Boeing was the world's largest manufacturer of commercial jetliners and military aircraft, commanding over 80% of the market share. All of this was rooted in the bold vision of a young lumber merchant who, on the shores of Lake Washington, tirelessly tested a makeshift wooden aircraft tied together with ropes, dreaming of creating a plane that wouldn't crash just to entertain spectators. Great technological enterprises often begin with ambitious dreamers, ascend to greatness through a culture of meticulous engineering, and eventually falter under the weight of short-term interests and internal power struggles. Today, Boeing faces one of the most significant crises in its history. The company is grappling with the fallout from the 737 MAX crashes and subsequent grounding, the suspicious deaths of whistleblowers, revelations from the Federal Aviation Administration about faulty aircraft parts, and a series of incidents involving its 737-800 planes, including accidents in South Korea. CNN global economic analyst Rana Foroohar, in her book Makers and Takers, argues that Boeing's challenges are emblematic of broader issues in the United States. She sums up the root of America's problems with one term: financialization. This phenomenon occurs when finance expands its influence to dominate the economy, shifting its role from a facilitator of growth to the primary objective itself. After its 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas, Boeing relocated its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago, a city closer to financial markets but far removed from its engineering hubs. The leadership, ignoring strong objections from Boeing's engineers, shifted its focus away from building the best possible aircraft. Instead, they prioritized cost-cutting and increasing shareholder returns, disregarding the value of time-tested foundational investments. According to Harvard Business School professor Gautam Mukunda, by acting entirely in line with Wall Street's demands, Boeing has, in fact, increased its risks. In William Boeing's biography, there are numerous references to his unwavering dedication to technical excellence and strict quality standards. During one of his factory inspections, he reportedly remarked about a slightly flawed piece of woodwork: "If my factory produces something like this, I'd rather shut it down." One can only wonder what William Boeing would think of his company today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel.